Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us on this Thursday. I'm Mark Schumacher, Executive Vice President of the Home Furnishings Association, and this is one of our hour-long weekly webinars, and we've been doing our best to really listen to retailers across the country as to what they really want to talk about each and every time that we get one of these broadcasts together. And so many people have been focused on the overall questions surrounding the economy. That are certainly weaving their way through everything we've dealt with, the closings, the reopenings. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. Let me tell you who our guests are before I do a little bit of housekeeping here. First of all, David Wessel joins us. He's a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute, spent 30 years as an economy editor for the Wall Street Journal, and as a matter of fact, Focus Economics considers him to be one of the top economic influencers out there. So David's joining us, which we thank you very much, David. And also we have a couple of retailers joining us who are going to have the chance to ask a lot of the questions and to help us guide through here. I'm very pleased to welcome Kurt Darrow. He's president of Lazy Boy. Kurt is joining us. Kurt, I appreciate you being here as well. And we have Matt Schultz. He's the co-CEO of Levin Furniture and John B. Schultz Furniture. Again, I appreciate everybody being here. I want to mention now, this is being recorded. So if you have a chance and you want to share this, you can certainly do it when it's over with. This will be on our myhfa.org/COVID-19 resource page, which has become really the best resource page that there is for anything revolving around home furnishings, retail, and COVID. And also, by the way, you can ask questions. Please do. You're going to notice on the right side of your screen the ability to enter a question. We will get to as many of those as we can. But first and foremost, the three of you, I appreciate you being here. David, I want to start out with you, if you could. And a great place to start is the news of the day. The news of the day is the jobs report came out showing that about 4.8 million jobs were added. Obviously, good news on one level, but can you kind of give us some perspective on that? Because that'll certainly frame part of the conversation today.
Sure. So what we learned today is that after just an incredibly sharp and abrupt bottom falling out of the economy in March, that the economy has begun to recover. So the good news is things are getting better. The bad news is it's nowhere near good. We're still down 15 million jobs from where we were in February. And there's every reason to believe that the snapshot of the job market that the Labor Department gave us today, which covers the middle of June, may be better than what we see right now. The idea that a lot of states are forced to lock down again, or close bars or restaurants, or warn people away from the beach or whatever, because COVID cases are going up, is not good for the economy. And I'm worried that when we get the next report a month from now, it won't be as good as this one, and this one is still pretty bad. The Congressional Budget Office has just come out with its new 10-year forecast, and economists' forecasts are usually a mildly educated guess. Now they're just guesses because they've never really been through this before. One of my friends says we have unprecedented use of the word unprecedented, but what CBO says is that the GDP will begin to recover. The economy will begin to grow in the third quarter of this year, but it'll be 2 years before we get back to the level we were at before the pandemic. And they predict that unemployment will remain above 7% for the next 2 years. So I think we're in for a long slog.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, I just want to get right into it because we've got a ton of ground to cover today. Kurt, would you like to start us out as far as one of your top questions relating to the economy and concerns about these coming months and weeks?
Yeah, glad to be part of this. Thanks for the invite, Mark. I just, the unprecedented and I appreciate his comments about somewhat the word about not always accurate on economists, because everybody takes what they say as gospel. But I guess one of the things what would you say could happen to the economy if they actually find a vaccine or medicine that would subdue some of the fear that if I contract this disease, I'm going to die? And would that, to me, that is the real indicator of where the economy may or may not go. If they never find one, we'll be sitting on the edge of our chairs for some time. But could that be a game changer?
Absolutely. I mean, I think to a large extent, the virus is in the driver's seat here. One of the most interesting things, you know, economists are beginning to do some interesting research into how did people behave over the last few months. And one of the things that a number of people have found is that consumer spending fell not on the day that some governor or mayor did the lockdown. People look at the newspaper, they get afraid, and they just stay home. And so if people are afraid because we haven't found a cure or a vaccine, or we may even be seeing it now as the cases increase, I think people are going to be pretty reluctant. I think if we do find a vaccine and we manage to get it widespread, that things could pretty rapidly return to normal. I'm just worried that that's not the case. But I'm sort of curious what you see in your business. So what the numbers tell us is that when things started to open up, people started buying. I guess they were tired of looking at the old chair in their living room. Is that what you saw? And is that, do you think, likely to continue?
So I think the industry as a whole, the home, not just furnishings, the whole home category has come out of this lockdown at a much higher level than anybody ever expected. And so we all expected when we were locked down that demand was going to be the problem. Now the problem is supply, because everybody's inventory, everybody's supply chain, and it's not going to be for a while how much did you write, it's how much did you get delivered. And everybody that I've talked to is catching up on inventory. So we can't tell you whether it's pent-up demand, like you said. I do believe if people sat in their homes for 12 weeks, they see things they don't like. This sector rotation of people not flying, going out to eat, and then the stimulus money that everybody got, or the extra unemployment. But we're not ready to declare victory yet, because some of those things can't last forever.
Right.
So, but right now, I think the home business is a benefactor of coming back out of a downturn, which forced you to stay at home. And people are saying there could be a second one, so I might as well make sure I'm not as angry about my home the second time as I am right now. It's beyond anything. I think if anybody was honest, and we can let Matt weigh in, it's beyond what anybody ever thought would happen. When we were in the depths of being shut down and worried about how long it was going to take us to get to a point where our businesses could be profitable.
Well, and it's interesting, and Matt, I do want you to weigh in, because the question now is the sustainability of that. And Kurt mentioned it, you know, the catch up here on the supply chain is a little bit of a hiccup. But Matt, if you would address that as well, and also, you know, chime in on that question about, you know, about that boost as soon as doors were reopened.
Yeah, I think it caught everybody by surprise how much demand when we reopened the doors in the furniture category, and I think it's the home category as a whole. And so the question is, you know, everyone was planning a decrease when we opened, thinking that the economy would not be as strong for us, and turned out to be the exact opposite, maybe 4 times more demand than we anticipated. So I guess I would ask, kind of, why do you think that happened in our category? Some of our thoughts were, I think, spending. People saved a lot more money during the closure. There was federal stimulus that was added, and then they aren't able to spend it on other categories. So the home seems to be a great place to be. And then how long do you foresee that, you know, change in customers' you know, choice of where they spend their disposable income to continue? I would ask them as a question. And then what happens, though? Is this driven in a large part from economic stimulus from the government? What happens when that ends? So from the PPP loans that were given, or the additional $600, which is a double-edged sword for us, where it's more difficult to bring back employees, and at the same time, it's giving some of our customers additional disposable income. And so that whole picture of how long can it continue? I mean, there's a lot of questions around it, and I want to ask a ton off the bat, but those are some of the things. How long can the home category? Why do you think it's so on fire? And will it continue? And then what happens once this economic government assistance ends to the economy as a whole?
And Mark, I would just add one more thing. We've just finished the month of June, which is normally one of the slower months of the year. And this is beyond November, January numbers. And it's, I have to keep pinching myself saying, really, this is June? If it 4 times, like Matt said, that of the rate in November, I don't know where everybody's going to get their goods, but it's been, I've never seen anything like it in my 40 some years in the business, this kind of demand in the summer.
Well, David, jump in here, because this is intriguing, because we've got the overall economic picture, and yet this segment that we represent is finding great success right now, yet clearly impacted by all these other economic factors. We gave you a lot in a fire hose there. Jump in.
Well, I'm not going to opine on the furniture business with this crowd. I only do that when I'm talking to people who don't know anything about it. But I think there's some interesting things that happened. So clearly, there were some ways that people spent money they're just not doing. A lot of people are not going to get on an airplane and take their kids to Disneyland, so they have some money. I think the reason we're not having a second Great Depression has a lot to do with what the government did, both all the stimulus and the Fed acting so quickly. The reason the Great Depression was as bad as it was is because the policy made all the wrong calls at the beginning of the 1930s. But the data is kind of interesting on who cut back their spending. It looks like everybody cut back their spending at first. It bounced back faster among lower income people, probably because they just didn't have that much margin. But there's quite a bit of cutting back on spending at the top quarter of the population. So those are people who probably have income, probably have saved some money. And the question is, what are they going to do with it? Are they going to start to take vacations and go to restaurants if things open up or not? I don't think we really know. I think there is a great deal of concern about what happens at the end of July if Congress doesn't extend some of these things. While $600 a month extra on unemployment, which was really done as an administrative efficiency, they couldn't figure out a way to do a more logical way of just like increasing everybody 10%, because the state unemployment system computers are so old, they couldn't handle anything complicated. I think there is a widespread sense in Congress that that's not a good idea to pay people more than they could make on the job market. And so there'll be some changes. My guess is that they will do some stuff before the end of July because this is taking longer to climb out of than we had anticipated, and because of the risk that we're going to have a second downturn if the pandemic forces another round of lockdowns, as is happening now in Arizona, Texas, and Florida, which are pretty big places.
So let me I want to just kind of put that as a little bit of a pin on the conversation here. So you're really feeling like one of the markers here is going to be what comes out of Washington by the end of this new month of July, because of the timing issue. And you talked about something that I saw both Matt and Kurt nod about, which was, the added unemployment has been a real concern for a lot of retailers trying to bring people back when they're making more money off the job than they are, as they are when they come back. So there's a regionality aspect of this crisis. Cities, states, everybody's doing things differently. How does that complexity, and this is a couple of questions I've had that have come in, how's that complexity really help to muddy these waters about trying to figure out where our economy is going?
Well, we are a very big economy. California is sometimes said to be the 5th largest economy in the world. I actually don't know if that's true. And we're the virus has hit different places at different times. I have a colleague who's left Brookings and is now teaching at the University of Utah Business School. And they've been doing a big random go around and, systematically say, we're going to test the people in every other house in this census block in various parts of Utah. And they have found very little COVID in what they're doing. And their hunch is that Utah shut down roughly the same time that other places shut down, but the virus hadn't got there yet. So they avoided the surge. But the risk is that once people, well, we didn't have it here, they get complacent, they don't wear masks, they get some return of tourism, that they'll just get a second wave. It's hard to talk about this without getting a little bit political. My judgment is that we didn't have the best, most coordinated and coherent set of instructions coming from the president and his team. And I think that's made it quite hard. Public health is always a local thing. And obviously it must be very hard for people in some small town in Wyoming where they had no COVID cases to understand why their schools had to close and stuff like that. So we do have to have a regionally differentiated policy, and the economy will come back in different places. You know, if you're dependent on tourism and people are afraid to travel, you're not going to do very well. It sounds to me like if you have the good fortune to be in a town that's still making furniture here in America, you can look forward to everybody working overtime for a while. But I think that there's a lot of confusion because people aren't sure, like, what is the standard? I mean, I've been watching the different colleges explain how they're going to open and not open and what the rules are going to be and what the contingencies are. And man, it makes it look like the tax code is simple. You know, they have 14 different bullet points and this, that, and the other thing. So I think it's going to be quite hard for us to have a coherent national understanding of what's going on because it will be different in different places. I think we could have had a more coherent set of standards than we've had, but we are where we are.
Kurt, let me toss you to another question. Go ahead. Kurt, do you hear us okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so yeah, I guess I think federally they could have had some principles, but you know, I guess how you deal with the challenge of what happened in New York doesn't have a whole lot of relevance to South Dakota, and the standards and how you should go about it and how fast you shut down everything. And if I remember right, South Dakota never shut down at all. Now I don't think the economy would survive with just South Dakota's buying power, but and so the question is, do you think there will be another national shutdown of most quote essential businesses, which we are one. We are an essential business. We just got a bad draw and didn't get included in it. But we operate a lot safer than Costco and Walmart because our stores are smaller in general. But that's for another time. But the question is,
maybe if you sold liquor on the side, you could be an essential business.
Or marijuana, or there's a lot of other things you gotta say to yourself, how in the hell can they open and we can't? But
I'm reeling you guys in. Hold on.
No, I know.
But I mean, I see this in my own neighborhood. Like on one hand, the stores are shut, and the other hand, the people who do landscaping are working. And I got a notice from the people who do the landscaping on my lawn. You know, it sounded like it was written by the CDC and how they were doing all the social distancing. Well, 4 guys arrive in a truck sitting as close as I am to this monitor. So like, look, I don't think we're going to have another national shutdown unless things get really bad. I think we will have some regional shutdowns for the reasons that are obvious. You get an uptick in demand for hospital beds, you're going to have to do something. But as I said earlier, some of this is going to have to do with how people are feeling things. If they feel they're safe, they're going to be more likely to go out and do stuff than if they feel they're at risk. And that has a lot less to do with what some mayor or governor writes on a piece of paper. I think the other thing that a lot of concern I've seen a lot locally here around Washington, D.C. is what are they going to do about the elementary schools? Because it's really hard to get the economy functioning if people are all trying to juggle their kids at home, and some people can't go to work if their kids aren't in school, and how are you going to do the schools? And like Loudoun County, Virginia is apparently going to give parents a choice. You can either have remote learning all week or 2 days in school and 2 days home, and they're asking everybody to check one of those boxes, and then they'll assign the kids to one class or another. And I'm thinking, like, I'm glad I don't have to do that one. So, but I am worried that we'll have an uptick in cases like we're seeing in Arizona and Texas and Florida now, and there's some in LA. If we get more of that, then I think we could have many places that are shut down, even as places like New York and Massachusetts seem to be bouncing back.
And follow-up question to that is, what effect do you think the protests and things going on, what impact on the economy? Is that discernible?
I think the first thing I would say is, I don't think the protests are unrelated to COVID. I think that people are pretty stressed out because of COVID, and also that COVID exposed some of the inequality in our societies in ways that were pretty dramatic. So I think that the killing of George Floyd was a spark that lit a fire on which we already had a lot of tinder. Obviously, I mean, there's some businesses around here that had just reopened. Then there were protests, some of which got turned violent, and they ended up shutting down again and boarding up their windows. So that can't be good. From what I see now, though, I think we're past that stage. Most of the protests that I've seen here and on TV seem to be reasonably peaceful. So I don't think that that's going to have as much of a lasting effect on the economy as, for instance, businesses that go bankrupt because they just couldn't deal without revenues. But you know, there's a lot going on here, and it's very unsettling. And you know, people always talk about, oh, it's hard because things are uncertain, but man, they're even more uncertain than usual.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so you know, we talked about, obviously this recovery has been fueled in a large part by government stimulus. What happens when that government stimulus goes away, or if it doesn't go away, how is this sustainable from a tax rate basis? Where do you think taxes, interest rates will move on this and its effect on the economy? So it's gotten us great. It's brought people back or helped sustain the economy, but how is this sustainable, and what happens to tax rates and down?
So I think there are two parts to that question. One is you could worry about that too soon, and there's a danger of that. That's what we did the last time. You know, as the economy was slowly crawling out of the Great Recession, that period around 2011, 12, and 13, when Congress tried to get religion about doing something about the debt, failed to come to agreement, and we ended up with these across-the-board spending cuts that really came at a bad time. So I think the biggest fear now is that Congress will pull back too soon. I'm particularly worried about what's happening at state and local level, where revenues are way off and Congress has been slow to come to that. There's an economist named Carmen Reinhart, who's a real tough fiscal responsibility. You know, she's no pandering to the deficit crowd, doesn't worry about deficits. And she had a great line. She said, when you're fighting a war, first you win a war, and then you figure out later how to pay for it. We are going to have to pay for this. We're lucky that interest rates are so low. It means that the government can borrow, the federal government can borrow a fair amount of money without running up a very big interest tab. And interest rates are low for two reasons. One is the Fed, and the other is that even without what the Fed's doing, interest rates around the world were kind of low and coming down before, and this has continued. There seems to be a lot of global savings that isn't finding its way to investment, and so it's available for the government to tap. But in the so the good news is we're lucky that I didn't think after the Great Recession we'd ever be able to borrow this much money again without having a huge spike in interest rates. So I was wrong. In the end, what's going to happen? We'll run up the deficit for a while. Eventually, interest rates will start to rise, or we'll get some fiscal responsibility in Washington, and then taxes will go up, and they'll try and do something to restrain spending on various benefit programs. But if I were like making a 10-year forecast of what's going to happen to taxes, I'd say I know the direction, I just don't know the degree. A lot depends on what happens on the election. It's easier to see a Democratic president and a Democratic Congress talking about raising taxes over the next 4 years than if President Trump is reelected and the Republicans keep the Senate.
And that's interesting that you brought that up. Both of you brought up questions that have been coming in. One was about the election, and the other was about tax rates. I want to remind people, by the way, who may have just tuned in. We've seen some people have joined us. This is the HFA weekly webinar. We are talking about the economy with David Wessel, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute, and we're being joined by Kurt Darrow of Lazy Boy and Matt Schultz of Levin Furniture. Let's ask about, you talked about interest rates. What about the potential of inflation? It seems like all of those indicators you're talking about are keeping us from that. Any thoughts about the possibility of that just as a rebound down the road here with all that's happened?
Right. So one of the things that makes this period unusual is that, and it's one of the reasons interest rates have been so low, that inflation has been very low. You know, I came to Washington in 1987 at the beginning of Alan Greenspan's term as Fed chairman. And the idea that the Fed would be standing there, you know, begging to get the inflation rate up to their target was not something that ever came across my desk at the time. So I think the best guess is that we don't have an inflation problem for a long time, and that'll give the Fed the leeway to hold rates down. But some of the things that Kurt Darrow mentioned could cut the other way. So what would lead to an increase in inflation? Well, what might lead to an increase in inflation if across the economy, supply is constrained, that businesses go bankrupt and they're not replaced right away, and that there's just basically a lot of demand coming into the economy and supply doesn't grow to meet it, then we could get an increase in inflation. I don't think that's the most likely thing, but I think that people who say it couldn't happen are just being naive. And a lot depends on what happens around the world. You know, if we get a vaccine or a treatment, and all around the world people begin to shake off the constraints of the COVID recession, and everybody starts spending it at once, and governments have borrowed a lot of money and they don't turn off the tap very quickly because they never move very quickly, well, you could see a bit of increase in inflation. We start from a pretty low level though, so I'm not that worried about it.
Okay. Kurt, I'll throw it your way.
David, just your opinion, and to not put you out on an island by yourself. Personally, I think the Fed has done everything possible that they could do to make sure that we didn't fall off a cliff, and they backed everybody. And I know in our business in the last recession, our customers didn't have many options on where to get money, and they relied a lot on suppliers. And there was a limit to what we could do, but we did quite a bit back then. This time around, most all of them got some PPE money or small business money or just and the amount that we had to help a lot of our customers was minuscule compared to last time, because the Feds have helped everybody stay solvent. So this, I think, could have been much worse if the Fed hadn't flooded the market with money.
I think that's right. So when you talk about your customers, you're talking about businesses that are buying.
Yeah, our retailers, our dealers.
Are your dealers? Yeah, I see.
Yeah. Now, but you know, the consumers got money as well, but first of all, the dealers had to have the ability to pay their people without being open and all the things that went on, and they
So did a lot of them get PPP loans in the
end?
end?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah, well, I think that's right. I think that, as I said earlier, you know, it's scary when you see that 11% of the people are unemployed, and you have this feeling that a whole lot of families are going hungry, and I'm sure that many are. But it's important to remember that a lot of the people who are unemployed are getting their unemployment check plus $600, and they got the $1,200 per adult check. So I think that that's helped. I think that it's kind of interesting what happened with the Fed. So first of all, they went through the entire 2008 playbook in about 20 minutes, you know, all the things they did then. And then they just invented new things that no one thought they would ever do, prodded a lot by Congress, which is kind of interesting politically. you know, for many years after the Great Recession, everybody was beating up on the Fed because they bailed out Wall Street and not Main Street. And then when it came time to figure out what to do in the COVID recession, Congress basically looked at the Treasury and looked at the Fed and said, well, if we're going to have to give the money for someone to administer, we'd rather that the Fed do it than the Treasury. I think it's still pretty complicated. You know, there's this thing called the Main Street Lending Program, which is for the middle-sized companies between 500 and 15,000 employees. And it's not clear there's going to be a lot of take-up there. The terms are pretty tough, and the banks seem to be reluctant. So I think we'll see how well it works. I think we're going to see some backlash because the government will have lent money to people who go under. I think that's, in my opinion, that's the right thing to do. If you had to lend to a lot of people, and you've got to hope that you're tiding them over. But if you only lent to people who didn't need the money, you're not going to solve the problem. So they were pretty generous this time. I think one reason that was possible, besides the fact that interest rates are low and they could borrow, is this wasn't anybody's fault. You know, COVID showed up. All right, I suppose the president can blame the Chinese, but the fact is, this wasn't Lehman Brothers' fault. It wasn't JP Morgan's fault. It wasn't GM's fault. It was like a meteor hit the country, and that made it easier for them to say, holy cow, we better do something. And I think they did. And I agree with you. I think the Fed has done an impressive job moving fast and forcefully. And I mean, imagine you're Jay Powell and you've just increased the Fed's balance sheet by $3 trillion. You know, I'd be a little hard time sleeping at night. Like, I hope we did the right thing here.
Yeah, no kidding. Matt?
So do you see this trend in the economy continuing, though, at the current level, unemployment staying where it is, but the demand, so our industry, not to talk specific to the furniture category, but that demand staying for a while that we're seeing out here, that the economy will stay at the level that it's at for an extended period of time?
No, I think a lot depends on the virus. So if the virus, if what we're seeing now is as bad as it gets, that they get things under control in the hotspot states, and we don't start to see a second wave somewhere else, and assuming for the moment that we don't get treatment or vaccine instantly, I suspect that the economy will improve, but at a slow rate. You know, it's the limit to how much the economy can grow if nobody goes, there was no ball games, nobody goes to the movies, restaurants are at 50% capacity max. There was going to be a lot of bankruptcies. And even if, you know, if you're a landlord and you could rent the space eventually, that takes time and stuff. So my guess is it'll slowly get better, but it may not feel like it's getting better. And there's a risk that won't happen if the virus comes back and bites us. We don't behave.
Do you think stimulus has to continue to stay at this level? I mean, it seems like such a big, to your point, sectors of the economy, hotels, restaurants, airlines are beyond, you know, down. And so how can the economy sustain that?
Well, like I said, for what it's worth, the CBO forecast is the economy will be growing, but we won't get back to the GDP level we had before the pandemic for another 2 years. So I think there's two sets of companies here, and they're in very different positions. Look, we're going to have a smaller airline industry. There's no doubt about it. I don't know who's going to go under and how they're going to consolidate, but there's just no way that we're going to have as many people flying around the world 2 months from now as we had in January. It's just not going to happen. Partly because some countries won't, I mean, the Europeans won't let us in for now. The Australians won't let us in. We're learning at Brookings that, you know, there's some things that you can do just as well on Zoom or go to webinar. And so there'll be fewer people traveling. And then there's the fear thing. So some sectors will shrink. Some sectors will expand as demand returns. Like, you know, people will eventually start going back to restaurants. And if kids go back to school, there's going to be back to school clothes, and people are going to, there's car sales will rebound. So I think the issue with the stimulus is basically a bridge from one side of the ravine to the other. And it turns out the ravine is a little bit wider and deeper than we had anticipated. So I think it's important that we keep the stimulus going until private demand comes back, but we have to accept that private demand may not return to the previous levels for quite a while, and in some industries, if ever.
You know, one of the things that just, and Matt, you said something interesting, and I know you were saying, you know, the answer didn't have to be specific to our industry, but you know, this is the thing about this crisis is that while our sector is doing well at the moment, is doing well, it is certainly impacted by consumer confidence, which all these other elements we're talking about, that's you know, that's based there. So that's, you know, that's a concern. You know, so this is one, and I mean, let's look at the stock market as well. You know, the stock market is impacted by all these different factors. You know, so David, this is why I think your job and others is so tough right now, because it's like a fruit salad of just an amalgamation of so many things that while our industry is doing well, it's going to be impacted by more than just our industry in many respects.
That's right. And that's why I think, you know, it seems like a cop-out to talk in terms of scenarios, but I think that's the only thing that makes sense. And if you have a lot of guts, you can put odds on them.
Okay.
I think the odds that we get the V-shaped recovery are pretty slim. I'm worried about the W-shaped recovery, that we have another downturn because some places will lock down. And I'm partial to the people who like to talk about this as the Nike swoosh, that, you know, it gets better. You know, we're in the good part now, whereas with the pent-up demand, but that it's a real slow turn. But can I ask you guys one question about, so what about trade with China and in your supply chains? Is that affecting you? Is that something you worry about, or is that not a big deal?
Go ahead, Matt.
I think the supply chain as a whole is just troublesome right now, just from the amount of demand that is out there. And so that is, you know, that goes back to the $600, you know, credit that workers are getting. It's great from a supply and people coming in with extra disposable income, but I think it's probably hurting Kurt and bringing back workers in factories in the U.S. side, I would say. And then from China, Vietnam, there's so much production trying to be moved over there to help that, you know, it's compounding issues. And then there's the trade and the tariffs coming out of China, which created problems. So it's a host, you know, of problems that at the end of the day is created a lot of supply side issues to get product from many vendors, I would say.
I would agree, and it just so happened because of tariffs and because of some other things that a lot of the industry moved out of China over to Vietnam, and it was the worry of tariffs, it was the worry of some other things, but it didn't really change. It really didn't change the game that much. It's still a long ways from Vietnam to the U.S. and they couldn't ramp up as fast as all the demand that China had, but there's been a big movement in the last 3 years out of China over to Vietnam. But that's the problem too. Even if they were ramping up their factories faster than the U.S., you still have the 13 weeks on the water. And people are shocked now when customers, when you tell them, well, we won't be able to get that to you until September. And they were used to pretty quick turnaround. And that's a difference. You asked that you can't have these conversations without getting political. And so I don't want to get political or put you too much on the spot, but if the Democrats win the election or the Republican wins the election, just speaking about the economy, what do you think the big differences would be in the initial things that had happened 6 months after the election?
Good question.
I'm great at questions. I suck at answers, but
so let's see. I think that it's a little hard to tell where the Republicans are right now on spending. You know, they were pretty loose with spending for the first couple of months of COVID. Now they seem to be a little tighter. So I would say on balance, the Democrats would be more ready to spend on things. And certainly they would be more interested in spending on expanding healthcare, things aimed at low-income people. So that's, you know, if it was just like how many dollars going out.
Yeah. Or
Frankly,
where they go.
Yeah. More dollars going out under the Democrats and headed to different places.
Sure.
I don't think either one of them, either set is worried about the deficit now. I mean, the public isn't worried about the deficit, and the bond market isn't worried about the deficit. And so their attitude is, well, someone else can worry about that later. I think the Democrats would be reluctant to use any kind of tax cuts to stimulate the economy if things are still weak. The Republicans would be more willing to do that. I think that the whole there's some of this is a lot to do with personnel. So the kind of people that Biden would appoint versus the Trump appointments, I would suspect that there's more I don't suspect. I'm certain there'll be more regulation under the Democrats than the Republicans. The Democrats think that's more important, and the Republicans, particularly in administration, have pulled back. I think it's really interesting question what happens on the trade front. You know, sometimes when you listen to the Democrats, they complain that Trump is not tough enough on China. So I don't think that we'd be in we're not going back to the let's all get along and we can trade and everybody be better off. I think that the politicians, because they sense the public has turned against trade, and so it'll be a long time before we get a big free trade deal. Maybe with a new president, there'd be an opportunity to cut some deals with China just because there'd be a honeymoon. But I think that's tight. Trying to think what else. I mean, when taxes go up, as they will, but I don't think it'll be in the next presidential term, the Democrats are more likely to raise them on the rich. You know, you hear from the administration sometimes talks about doing some kind of capital gains tax cut to help the economy, that the Democrats aren't going there. So that's just, I'm kind of running out of things.
Yeah. Most of those make sense and are historically proven to be the bias.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, and Kurt, you actually capsulized your question about 3 questions that came in from other people watching the webinar. So I appreciate that very much. One of the questions that came in, and I just touched on it briefly, but David, how does the performance of the stock market play into all of this? I know sometimes it's considered the bellwether for how obviously the people in the country feel, but is it going to have a lot of influence on this economic situation going forward? Is it going to be more reactive to that? Where do you see that playing? And that's certainly something that plays into anybody that's going into any of our retailer stores, et cetera.
No, it's a good question. It's a bit hard for me to figure out what's driving the stock market. I think it overreacted to the initial COVID thing, but since then it seems to have been more complacent than I would have expected. So what does it mean? Well, I think that in general, people and businesses feel better about the economy when the stock market is going up than when it's like losing 700 or 800 points 2 or 3 days in a row. So that's a confidence thing. For some people, not the bulk of Americans, but for some people, it makes them wealthier and they're more willing to spend. For the president, it clearly, he even said it today in a statement on the jobs market, on the job report, he sees it as like the only barometer that matters. So in a strange way, if the stock market is up, I suspect he'll push Congress less hard to do another big stimulus at the end of July than if the stock market is down. Clearly, and this is partly the stock market and partly what the Fed has done, for businesses that can go to the markets, either with equity or bonds, things are working out pretty well. The bond markets are functioning. A number of companies have chosen not to take advantage of the Fed facilities, can get a better deal on their own in the bond market. And to the extent that businesses want to raise equity or their feeling about the future is somehow influenced by how their stock price is doing, I think it's a plus. In general, I think it's less of a barometer of the economy than sometimes made out. You know, it has the advantage of something you can look at minute to minute, but I think it's too often the press makes it seem as if it is the most important barometer of the economy, and I don't believe that.
Isn't one of the problems there is the stock market is really global, and we act like it's just U.S. companies?
Yeah, that's part of it. I mean, the S&P 500, a lot of them have big foreign operations. Absolutely.
Right.
And the other thing is, you know, you don't really know, but is one reason the stock market up is because everything else is unattractive. You know, when the bank CD rates are 65 basis points and, you know, the long-term treasury is 1.7%, a lot of people will reach for yield and go to the stock market, and that's clearly helping. And in a way, that's part of that's the way monetary policy works, by boosting asset prices. So if one scenario is the economy gets a lot better quicker than is anticipated, we start to see an increase in inflation or the threat of that. The Fed pulls back more quickly than had been anticipated. I suspect, on one hand, that's good. The economy is strong enough that the Fed thinks that they don't have to do so much, but that may not be good for the stock market.
All right, for those of you that have just tuned in, if you will, you're listening to the HFA webinar today. We're focusing on the economy with David Wessel of the Brookings Institute and Kurt Darrow from Lazy Boy and Matt Schultz from Levin Furniture. Matt, I'm going to let you throw the next question now.
Yeah, so I would say, what do you think, you know, from a long-term, you know, say a year from now, what does the economy look like?
So
With
I think
no vaccine, it's still on the cusp of the vaccine, that it hasn't come out, it's not available, and it can. If 1 year from now, how would you view, you know, the economy?
Well, look, we're not going to get back to full vitality if we don't have the vaccine or treatment. There's only you know, as social distancing and wearing masks is kind of a bummer. My office says we're closed through Labor Day at the earliest, and there's a lot of talk that offices in DC will be closed through January 1st. So I think if we don't have a vaccine, I think the economy will be bumping along at a painfully slow pace. But I thought you were going a different place, which is whether we have a vaccine or not, we don't really know how much the economy is going to be different. You know, how many people are going to still work at home? How will you know, will lots of, I mean, Amazon and places like that, are people going to go back to the stores? And buying furniture online, I think, is probably behind a lot of other things. But, you know, there was a story in the Journal the other day about online car shopping is finally picking up. So I think that there's two different ways to look at this. One is, how strong will the economy be if we don't have a vaccine or a treatment? I would say not very, because people are going to be afraid. I would be afraid. And especially if we keep reading about, you know, 50,000 cases today, and you hear about your cousin's in-laws getting sick and stuff like that, I think that's going to hurt the economy. And then the second question is, will this have lasting changes? You know, a lot of people, I think, overdo it. They extrapolate from the current situation and they say everything will be different. And I keep remembering how after 9/11, I thought, man, things will never be the same. And, you know, all right, so we have to go through TSA at the airport. But when I think about all the things that have happened since 9/11, the things that really moved the economy weren't related to fear of terrorism. So I think we'll have to see.
Let me ask you this, David. Are there things that that all of us should be looking for, you know, markers or things like that in the coming weeks that will give us an idea about where the economy may or may not be going beyond the immediate finding of a vaccine? What are some of the things that you would suggest we look for to really judge where we're going?
Right. So I think the problem with most government data is it's backward looking. Like today's jobs report tells us what was happening in the middle of June, and we know that the world has changed some since then. So I think there's a lot of interesting private sector data coming out. JP Morgan has one on from JP Morgan credit cards, what people are spending on. People are looking at cell phone mobility data, which tells you about how much people are moving around. I think all those, there's a place called Homebase, which has some small business stuff. I've actually been pretty impressed with the Census Bureau, which, you know, is a big bureaucracy, but they move very quickly, and they have now a weekly survey, one of households and one of small businesses, so you can kind of see the trends. So I think and apart from what's happening with the virus, short of the vaccine, I mean, as I said about 6 times already, you know, when you turn on the TV or you read in the newspaper or listen on the radio and you see the count going up of people getting sick, you don't really need a whole lot of economic indicators to know that's not good. But I think judging how people behave, all this multitude of private sector real-time data is pretty interesting. And no one thing obviously is very useful, but I think there's a pattern there. I'm finding myself more interested in those things than I used to be.
So David, to follow up on that, one of the arguments is one of the reasons our numbers are going up is we're just testing a lot more people. And maybe that those problems have existed. We didn't have all the tests. And then we kind of told people that when it gets warm this summer, it's going to tamp down the virus, and young kids aren't really going to have a problem with it. So go out and do whatever you want. So we have a lot of conversing messages, and
Absolutely.
So far about every data point has not, when people are doing their best, but every data point has been a little mixed about what's the genesis of the data.
Well, I think that's true, but there's some things we know. So apparently the world has now come along to the wearing masks is a good idea. So that's a change. That wasn't where they were before. And it looks like contact outside doesn't spread as much as contact inside. I mean, we had all these big demonstrations, but so far we haven't seen a big uptick in cases. So the outside versus inside thing seems to be a big deal. The young people invincible thing is clearly they think they're invincible and they're not. I mean, they opened the bars and all of a sudden cases go up. I don't think that the argument that we're getting more cases because we're testing more holds water. First of all, we learned something from how many of the tests are positive, and in some places that's risen. And secondly, I mean, for instance, in Austin now, Austin, Texas, the ICU is full. So that's not a testing thing, that's people being sick. And similarly with the deaths, when the deaths go up, we might not attribute them all correctly, but so I think that that's not the right thing. This testing thing is really interesting, and I don't quite understand how this is going to shake out. So on one hand, they say test, test, test. I have a young colleague who's getting married, and he and his wife are going to take the honeymoon they planned in Alaska, and they have to get tested 3 days before they go and test negative. But if you test negative, you're negative now, and then you go on an airplane to Alaska, and the guy sitting next to me. So I don't quite how this is going to all shake out until we get the treatment or the vaccine, and that's kind of scary. Now, it is encouraging to me that the work on the vaccine seems pretty aggressive. It's not like there are a lot of people working on it. They're spending a lot of energy, a lot of smart people. They're not all going on one direction, so we're going to have a variety of routes. Some will work out and some won't. Fauci said he thought we might have a vaccine by January, which stunned me because he doesn't strike me as the most overly optimistic of the crew. So we can certainly hope that's the case. But, you know, I think that in the hotspot states, I don't think it's because they're testing more. I think it's because they have more cases, and that's scary.
But do they have, am I reading it right, that they're having percentage-wise less deaths because younger people are getting tested and contracting the virus?
But I think the evidence is that it's really amazing how much we don't know. So why do some young people get really sick and others don't? And how do you know which camp you're in?
Yeah.
I mean, so for instance, there is some science I gathered if your blood type is A, which is like 40 or 50% of the population, you're more likely to get severely sick. On the other hand, I mean, my wife has an aunt who's 97. She's in a continuing care facility in Massachusetts. They had widespread COVID. She got it. She never had any symptoms. She said finally, like, why is everybody asking me all the time how I'm feeling? I feel fine. Tested positive and never got the sniffles. So it's really, and then, but you hear these other horror stories about, people who had all the complications. So,
isn't this, I'm just sitting here listening to this conversation and it just strikes me. And this is something that we've not seen in our lifetimes, no matter our age in this group, and may never. But isn't it interesting that a conversation about the economy and where we're going is spinning on the medical world and a process, the creation of a vaccine, which is a long, drawn-out process. It's not something you can just, flip a switch. But it's so interesting to me that we're talking about things that none of us here, not even any of the great, medical minds in the world, can give us definitive answers on. So
no, but I think that's true, but we can't say we weren't warned. I mean, there were people who kept saying we're not. I mean, Bill Gates has been on this campaign for years that we're not ready for a pandemic and one's going to come. So, but I do think you're right, and that's what I mean. To go back to the economic policymakers for a minute. So let's say you're at the Fed or you're a responsible member of Congress, and you're really trying to decide what to do here. And the answer is, well, it depends on what happens on the vaccine and the treatment and the case of the disease. And you don't really know. That's why there's some efforts in Congress, I'm not sure they're done anywhere, to whatever they do to have a trigger so that it triggers on or triggers off, depending on what happens to the economy and the virus.
Well, I just want to mention we get about 2 minutes left here, and I want to make it very clear that this webinar has been recorded and will be available at myhfa.org/COVID-19 for people to be able to share it and to pull even more information from it. So I want to point that out. You can see that on your screen right now. And also, by the way, you can continue the discussion on our Facebook group, HFA Retailer to Retailer. As we finish up, gentlemen, with about 3 minutes left, I want to just, first of all, Kurt, let me ask you a question, just briefly. Are there any other final concerns or quick questions you have that David can answer at the moment?
No, he's been very helpful, and I think the more data points you get from various people, the more you can make your own decisions, what you're doing for your own company and bias on aggressiveness, conservatism. So I found it very informative, very helpful.
Well, I'm going to mention that to you, and David, we'll talk after this, but I will promise everybody listening, we will supply you with some of those benchmarks that David talked about. We'll get that from you because that was really great stuff, the JP Morgan report and others. I think it's helpful to know where you go because that's helpful. Matt, what about you? Any final quick question for David?
No, it was great just to get a high-level overview of kind of what you think's happening, where we're going to go in the future here. So really appreciate taking the time to spend with us.
Thank you, and good luck with your big expansion.
Thank you.
Well, and it's
bullish on the economy, so we think it's going to be good.
Well, and at the end of the day, this is an inexact science, clearly, and I'm not talking about figuring out the economy. I'm talking about figuring out the customers that are out there and coming in the door. But I do think that at least we can hang our hat on the fact that business has been rebounding pretty strongly for our sector.
And Mark, I'd like to add the work that you personally and the organization has done to try to keep the industry informed. Again, I've had 41 years in the industry, and I've never seen the industry be more together on trying to figure something out. And you've provided a forum for everybody to listen to other people. And again, I have found it very helpful over the last 100 days.
Well, it's funny that you said 100, Kurt, because HFA is 100 years old, and it was put together by a group of retailers back in the pandemic 100 years ago. to learn best practices, to share, to try to survive together. And look where we are. So we're just doing what our founders wanted us to do. But thank you for that. We appreciate it. I want to thank our guests today. I want to thank Kurt Darrow from Lazy Boy. Kurt, it's wonderful to have you there, giving a perspective from a manufacturer as well as a retailer. Matt Schultz from John B. Schultz and from Levin Furniture. Appreciate your input as well. And I especially want to thank David Wessel. David, I know this is a busy time, but being able to get someone with your background to field questions for not just us, but for the industry, we really, really appreciate it. Once again, this has been recorded. It'll be available on our website, myhfa.org. Gentlemen, thank you very much. And for everyone else listening, we're coming right now on to a holiday weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, and may business be great. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.